Hey guys, it's Krista Watson here from Krista Quilts, and today we're going to focus on one of those simple designs that often gets a bad rap. We're talking about straight line quilting done with your walking foot. Now today I want to show you 3 fun variations that are a lot more interesting to stitch rather than just stitching in the ditch. These are even parallel lines, matchstick quilting, and uneven parallel lines. These can all be found in my book, 99 Machine Quilting Designs. Now, don't let the simplicity deceive you. Even though these are easy to stitch, it really adds a lot of complexity to your quilts. Now let me show you how I stitch it. Even parallel lines, matchstick quilting, and uneven parallel lines are the first 3 designs in the book. So doodling this straight line design is pretty self-explanatory. All I'm doing is sketching out some straight lines. Now, if you want the lines to be perfectly straight, you can go ahead and mark them ahead of time using a washable pen or some painter's tape. But for the purposes of my demonstration where I'm just drawing out the lines, I'm kind of eyeballing it, and that's totally fine. You can also use seam lines as a guide. Now, once I've done the first pass of straight lines, then I'm just going to go back and subdivide it, and I'm going to draw lines in between. Again, I can mark these out. This works really well if you're doing some kind of grid-based design that's easily divisible. So like if you have 2-inch squares or 1-inch squares, you can really easily see how close you want to make those lines, and you don't have to do as much marking. When quilting evenly spaced parallel lines, the important part is that I am going to mark every single line. I rarely mark my quilts, and when I do, it's only if I want my lines to have precise placement and I want them to be evenly spaced. In this instance, I started off by quilting the lines about 2 inches apart, and I did all of that in one pass across the quilt. Then I went back and I quilted my lines approximately 1 inch apart all the way across the quilt from edge to edge. If I wanted to make this more dense, I could go back and quilt another pass and subdivide that space even further. It's important to mark all the lines if you want them to be parallel and straight and even, because this ensures that the quilting is evenly dense across the quilt and so that my lines don't get out of whack while I stitch. If you really love the idea of dense straight lines, you can go even further with matchstick quilting. Start with a fairly even quilted straight line design and fill in the gaps with even more lines. When quilting this design, I'm still implementing my divide and conquer process. I'm going to stitch in the middle of each row to subdivide that small space into an even smaller area to quilt. Continue subdividing the space until you get the density that you want. This design is best stitched edge to edge across the quilt due to so many starts and stops. Rather than tying off each of those thread tails, all I have to do is trim up the edges and then cover the finished quilt with binding. Here's my finished practice sample showing 3 different densities of lines. It's really fun to decide how close or far apart you'd like to stitch. So for uneven parallel lines, I'm going to start off the same way I did when I did the parallel lines, where I'm just going to make anchor lines all the way across the quilt. And these are probably going to be evenly spaced out because I'm going to stitch them wherever I have a seam in the quilt. This is going to hold the quilt together, and it's basically what I call my anchor quilting or my stabilizing quilting. Once I've done the first pass of relatively even lines, then I'm going to have fun. I'm going to stitch another line next to a previous line, but this is where I can vary the spacing. Maybe some of them are going to be a little more wider space, some of them are going to be a little more narrow. And you can see as I draw, I'm not really drawing that straight because I don't really have a straight line, but this gives me an idea. Whenever I'm making a quilting plan, I'm not worried about if my quilting plan looks exactly like my quilting. It's just kind of a roadmap that tells me what to do. Let's say I'm going to add a few more, and I can continue doing 2, 3, 4, 5 passes across the quilt, pretty much going until I feel like it's done and there's enough texture. When quilting uneven parallel lines, I start off by stitching evenly spaced lines across the quilt based on where the seam lines are. Then I'm going to change the needle position to make the lines closer together or further apart. Here's where I can really have fun with it and be completely random. Because when it comes to quilting straight parallel lines, I actually prefer to make my lines uneven because it hides a lot of my imperfections. This design is fast, easy, and forgiving, and there's absolutely no marking involved. I really love the look of uneven parallel lines stitched out on my practice sample. The irregularity provides a lot of variety in your quilt. Now that I've shown you what you can do with some simple straight lines, let's see what these look like when you apply them to a real quilt. For this quilt behind me, it's called Rain, and it's a little bit more of a modern looking design. I actually made this quilt several years ago when my very first book came out called Machine Quilting with Style. You can actually still get that book as a PDF, and you can get the pattern to make this quilt. On a couple more recent quilts that I've made, first one of them is called Positive Direction. This was a fun patriotic quilt that I made, and I really wanted to emphasize the linear texture of this quilt, so I marked every single line and made sure that they were perfectly even and perfectly straight. Going back to the unevenness of this design, which I think is my personal favorite, I also quilted these lines on a design called Geese in the Garden. So play around and think of what quilts you have in your UFO pile that you could quilt some fun straight lines. Be sure to check out the description box for links to all of my books and patterns, as well as an intro video to this series. Until next time.